Hey guys, it's Selwen here, now previewing the good old warrior, now in the whole glorious straight posture of the magnificent and sexy orcs. So what has been changed in the arms warrior? And the answer is quite a bit, mostly since a lot of our abilities, or rather passives, were based on our artifact weapon. Some changes were obviously needed. Overall, the changes are being embraced by most arms warriors, myself included, even though personally I was never a fan of arms. In theory, always sounds amazing, but I just don't like how slow it feels, and in here in BFA it went back to that very slow, more methodical type of play than the 2-button brainless rotation of Legion. So here on the spellbook we get the almighty battle shout back, which is very nostalgic for me, and with a cool animation. It's basically your class buff to increase attack power for everyone by 10%. Execute is kinda the same as in Legion, your big dick ability, although all those improvements of Legion traits are gone, costing 20 to 40 rage now. The higher the rage, the more damage it will do, plus refunds 30 rage if the target doesn't die by it. Berserker Rage, Hamstring and Heroic Leap all the same. Blaze Storm still the same, but it does feel a little bit more powerful right now than in Legion, but maybe that's just the Deep Wounds mastery. More on that in a bit. And again, this is beta, so numbers might change, so there's really no point in talking about that. And all of these are the same also. Colossus Smash went back to its old version, now a cooldown of 45 seconds, dealing a pretty big hit and increasing our damage by 30% for 10 seconds on the target. This is now your main cooldown. We did lost our Battle Cry or Recklessness as arms, and there aren't any procs that reset it, so now it's just a pure cooldown for you to decide when it would be the best moment to use it and to get the most out of it. So it adds a lot more planning to it than in Legion, which there was no planning at all. The classic Mortal Strike, it's still the same, although no longer has a cooldown reset procs as well, so now it's on that short cooldown, reduced by haste, to once again plan where to use it for a pretty decent hit, especially with the new that is on the second page, Overpower, which I loved in Legion, mainly for the animation of just bashing the mob, but yeah, it wasn't all that great. Now it kind of functions in the same way as the Colossus Smash did in Legion, still dealing the damage and cannot be blocked, dodged or parried on a 12-second cooldown, but increases the damage of your next Mortal Strike by 20%, stacking 2 times. So kinda like the Colossus Smash proc that we have, although not as powerful, plus it stacks 2 times. And it basically allows you for some extra thinking on your part on trying to reach it to make the most out of your Mortal Strike. Mix that in with the Colossus Smash cooldown and you can immediately see the sort of methodical playstyle that ARMS is all about. Not only that, you get a Tactician proc now to affect Overpower instead of in Colossus Smash and the Mortal Strike combo. You have 0.90% chance per rage spent on damaging abilities to reset the remaining cooldown on Overpower. Overall, the thinking on your procs will sort of stay the same as the previous procs of Colossus Smash in Legion. You just get a new ability to do it instead of mindlessly spamming those 2 buttons over and over again. This way you also have to put a lot more thinking into your Mortal Strikes and when to use them, together with that RNG that is the Overpower procs. Your Whirlwind still here for your AoE needs, and Slam as your filler, working all the same to get those Tactician Overpower procs. Sweeping Strikes makes a return as an unused ability. I'm sure a lot of you are happy to see this, myself included. It's on a 20-second cooldown, and for 10 seconds, your single target's damaging abilities hit one additional target within 8 yards for the same damage. So your go-to ability to start cleaving with the obvious thinking on when to use it instead of a passive that we got in Legion. Plus, it also works with your Colossus Smash, so you'll be able to Colossus Smash 2 targets in one go. So again, the planning. As for mastery, like I said previously, is Deep Wounds, which is a classic. Striking an enemy with Mortal Strike Execute or Blade Storm inflicts deep wounds, bleeding the target for 3 seconds. Your mastery just increases how powerful the dot will be. It doesn't really change anything gameplay wise, but it's satisfying and cool to hear all those bleeded sound effects. Always reminds me of TBC for some reason, but they are always super cool. And lastly, Seasoned Soldier, your auto attack critical strikes generate 30% more rage. That is still the main way for you to get rage as arms, so auto attacks, although you get a new ability that also helps there. So from what you've seen here, you already got some idea at what the new arms is gonna be all about. Mainly about timing and planning around your overpowers to empower your mortal strikes, while at the same time manage your slams with your rage to get more procs of overpower to stack that mortal strike buff, and then plan around with your Colossal Smash to use at the best possible moments. Now let's look at the talents and see what else has been changed or added. And the first thing you're gonna notice is Sudden Death. Yep, it is back as a talent. In Legion, you had it as that Lego ring because, you know, Legos, and is what you expect. It still adds that unpredictability to the spec in the form of a proc, which makes your rotation more interesting and you're gonna feel more engaged. And it's an execute, which is always fun to use, plus will add up to your deep wounds and a chance to proc your tactician passive, since it counts as using 40 rage, although I'm not 100% positive on that one. Skull Splitter is the new ability entirely, dealing a pretty decent hit and generates a 30 rage. As it stands, it's just another button for you to click, which is fine. It kind of feeds you into a Mortal Strike or a filler like Slam or Whirlwind. And it feels nice to have this at lower levels of play. At higher levels of gear and whatnot, I can see this becoming more of a nuisance than anything else, especially and if rage kinda stabilizes to a point that you won't really need this ability, making a switch to Sudden Death instead. But besides that, it's okay, it works. War Machine is coming from the Fury spec, it kind of follows the idea of Skull Splitter, making your auto attacks generate 10% more rage, and killing an enemy instantly generates 10 rage and increases your movement speed by 30%, basically improving your rage passively, working best in out and about in a world or dungeon scenarios, but nothing that will change your gameplay. Second tier, you got the same options as in Legion. You get your double time for more charges and mobility, your impending victories for healing, and your Stormbolt for your singular stun. It's worth noting here that Arms lost the Shockwave stun, is not part of your talents nor its baseline, is now a protection only ability, so you did lose some utility there sadly, so taking Stormbolt might be your only way to add utility in Mythic Plus. Next tier is the same as in Legion, your trauma for that passive bleed, Slam, Whirlwind and Execute now causes the target to bleed for 20% additional damage over 6 seconds. Add this to Deep Wounds and you're gonna get 2 bleeds going on there passively. This seems to still feel the best combined with Fervor of Battle here to make that Whirlwind style of play, which still exists here in BFI, more on that in a bit. Rend for that on-use bleed, requiring more thinking than trauma, not by much, but still, but costs rage and obviously you need to keep it up, so it's gonna take a global cooldown. It does feel quite expensive, but that might possibly be the low gear, maybe. Either way works the same as in Legion, however remember now that you have more buttons to click, so it might feel potentially a bit cluttered to you, especially if you mix Skull Splitter in here as well. It's also worth noting though that when having Sweeping Strikes active, it does apply the 2 rends to both targets, which is nice. An Avatar for a DPS cooldown on 1.5 minutes cooldown, and transforming into a Colossus for 20 seconds, dealing 20% decreased damage and removes all roots and snares, plus generates 20 rage. It still looks and feels cool as ever, even though it's just a flat damage increase, but it is on a global cooldown now though, which sucks, making it more troublesome to use, but hey, it's there for burst, you're just gonna have to wait for the global cooldown. Yay. On the next tier, once again, same as in Legion, you get your extra heal in the form of Second Wind, more mobility again with Bounding Stride for more jumps with Heroic Leap, which is not on the global cooldown, thank god, and the defensive stance to just reduce damage. Next, you get your multi-target-ish choices here. You get your Cleave, which, Cleave is now a talent, striking all enemies in front of you, and if it strikes a 3 or more, it inflicts deep wounds, costing 20 rage on a 6-second cooldown. And it is kinda weird seeing it as a talent, yes, but at the same time, Cleave in Legion was nothing special, right? It's just served to make your whirlwind better. Here it does seem to hit harder, but you know, numbers can change. And it can apply deep wounds, adding more weight to the ability, which does feel better. Seems to be your go-to for Mythic Plus or sustained multi-target. Worldbreaker is basically your artifact ability made a talent, replacing your Colossus Smash this time to make it an AoE version, essentially. And it's okay, in dungeons it's alright, the cooldown doesn't really allow for much use between trash packs, but can make your Blade Storm, for an example, hit much harder, so there's that synergy, especially if you combine, say, Avatar here to even go for more burst, but besides that, again, it's alright. And then you get collateral damage? I don't know, I think I'm saying that wrong. Which improves your cleaving. When your abilities damage a second target due to Sweeping Strike, they refund 20% of their rage cost. So it does what it does, helps with rage when cleaving a lot, so it would be your choice for sustained cleaving. And in the next tier you got Hin for the kill, like in Legion, and it's kinda the same. Makes your Colossus Smash grants 10% haste, up from 8% for the duration of Colossus Smash. And again, it's alright. In Legion worked because you had Colossus Smash constantly, so the buff was just kept. But here, just doesn't feel as good. Yeah, it does make those windows flow a little bit better since you can do things faster, plus you get 20% below 20% HP on the target, so helps with the execute phases, but besides that, not much else to see. Fervor of Battle, if you don't know, was a way in Legion to essentially use whirlwinds in single target in place of slam. It usually dealt more damage than it, but consumed more rage. That came with benefits and cons. The benefit was a higher chance on the Tactician procs, which still exists here, and the con was just the higher rage cost. Now here makes whirlwinds do 10% more damage, plus it slams your target. So basically it's two abilities in one. Gameplay wise it won't change much, you simply won't click slam and you will click whirlwinds and that's it. It does create a synergy with trauma, buffing it nicely since now is two separate abilities, but again also can be more rage consuming. So there's that decision to make there. We're just gonna have to wait for max level and live version to see how all of that will work out in terms of numbers. The thing I don't like about this talent is just aesthetic. It just feels super weird be spamming whirlwinds in single target. I mean, am I the only one? Isn't it super weird? Deadly Calm is back as well, but changed, and now is a 1 minute cooldown, reducing the rage cost of abilities by 100% for 6 seconds. This also feels a little bit weird. I mean, it can work fine for execute phases, for free executes, and to start up fights to make everything free or to fish for some overpower / tactician procs. But if it works there, again, I'm not entirely positive. I think it was working, but again, this is beta. But it just doesn't feel right. Besides the execute phase, you don't really need it much. But hey, maybe I'm wrong and once we get to the numbers, it will be super OP. And it is on a global cooldown, so there's also that to take in mind. And last year we get Ravager back and does what it does, replacing your Blade Storm, reducing the cooldown to 1 minute and generating rage. It still feels pretty decently to use, the rage provided and the damage are great for openers, but besides that is the same. The loss of Battlecry is noticed here though, but hey, it's a cooldown that you're gonna use more often and allows you to keep up with your rotation and not locking you in the Blade Storm animation. Anger Management, every 20 rage you spend reduces the remaining cooldown on Colossus Smash, or Warbreaker, Blade Storm and Deadly Calm by 1 second. This always been a sort of talent which sounds pretty cool in theory, but never really competed with the others, at least in Legion. But again, putting numbers aside, because this is beta, it's cool getting the cooldowns more often. And there's not a lot of synergy between these cooldowns, you know, because Closet Smash is on a different timer, Blade Storm is on a different timer, and Deadly Calm is also on a different timer. So even with these reductions, you'll never be actually able to stack the cooldowns. Or maybe we are not supposed to stack them, I don't know. But between Ravager and the now Dreadnought makes it a really tough choice to take this talent. So Dreadnought grants your Overpower 2 charges, and increasing your Mortal Strike damage by an extra 10%, so 30%, to a max of 60% extra damage on Mortal Strike when you have the 2 stacks. This just makes all of your rotation easier, at least for single targets. Getting to those 2 stacks is far easier, plus the charges on Overpower does add a little bit more thought to them. Instead of using them on cooldown and when you get the proc, you can plan a bit more, like leaving one up to just have the cooldown ticking and saving it for a next Mortal Strike, you know, and stuff like that. So it does add more thinking to Overpower, it makes Overpower a more interesting ability than it already does, and it makes the rotation easier. So yeah, in general, the idea of arms is kinda the same as in Legion, just with more buttons to click. You're still focusing on empowering Mortal Strikes, that still is your main big ability, but now does require more thinking going into them, instead of just Colossal Smash, Mortal Strike. Colossal Smash on itself is back as a regular cooldown, which is what it should be, so again adds to that all planning thing with your Overpowers and Mortal Strikes. And the Sweeping Strikes, which can be somewhat considered a cooldown, also adds an interesting mix to the planning thing, which is what ARMS is all about. You know, just timing a full buff Mortal Strike just before you use the Sweeping Strikes, or when you're about to refresh Rends, or when you're about to apply a Colossal Smash, or both, or you are executing. So there's all that thinking going on when you are cleaving and you have this ability, so it's far more interesting than just having that passive. Speaking of which, the execute phase changed a bit. In Legion they were connected to Tactician procs and your Mortal Strikes. Now execute kinda just replaces your filler when you get to the 20%, but you still want to be using those Overpower to stack up to the Mortal Strike with the buff twice, potentially doing more damage and execute. Again, number stuff, but again, kinda the same. You're just gonna be using executes and then Overpowers and Mortal Strikes at 2 stacks, and then go back to executes to fish for Overpower procs. As for your talent tree, isn't great and far from perfect, but works. You get some choices between Slam or Whirlwind playstyle like in Legion, then its respective bleed effects and other small choices. You get a last tier talent choice on making the rotation easier, or making your cooldown more powerful, or just getting your cooldowns more often, or your AoE tier that you're gonna have to decide what will work best for each individual encounter or situation that you're gonna be in. But overall, coming over from Legion, I believe it's a pretty good improvement. We get the somewhat classic ARMS playstyle back that is much more fun than the 2-button rotation that we had, and overall does feel a little bit slow, but again, it's ARMS and I basically have no gear, so there's that also to take in mind. But again, it's ARMS, so that's kinda the idea of this. So guys, that covers it all. Do let me know down in the comments what you all think of ARMS in BFA. As always, have a fantastic day everyone, and I will see you all next time. See ya!